Hey, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of Frank About Health. Today, it is my honor to bring back Phyllis Quinlan to join me in a follow-up discussion of what we had a couple weeks ago when we questioned if healthcare disruption was fact or fiction. However, no better than to have Dr. Marschall Runge, today's guest, help us outline that further, especially in his upcoming book, The Great Healthcare Disruption, to be released on May 6th, next Tuesday. And for that reason, this is going to be kind of an experiment here on Frank About Health. We're first going to have a usual episode, which is a discussion that Phyllis and I will have with Dr. Marschall Runge to explain his background, to explain his thoughts on healthcare disruption in our society, as well as in medicine and in healthcare as an example. But then on the 8th, we'll have a live actual discussion about the book, which when it is released, you will be able to have live question and answers and interaction with Dr. Runge. And we hope to be a very good campaign of sorts, but showing how Frank About Health continues to advocate for innovators and medical practitioners in healthcare. Now, I will issue my disclaimer. Anyone out there listening to any of the content we are discussing today about healthcare-related issues that could be sensitive in nature based on personal or professional experience, they are not the views of talkradio.nyc or of Frank About Health, but rather the views of medical professionals and experts and individuals like myself who have been patients of various services and who know whether or not what we discuss today has efficacy or not. If you find it disagreeable, I have no problem saying this is not the show for you. I just want it clear that we're here to educate and explain that healthcare is not only something that we all have to learn to manage, but we have to own outright. And that's what I'm aiming Frank About Health to do with Dr. Marschall Runge and Phyllis Quinlan on today's show, as well as on the special show that we will have next week. There's my disclaimer. That all being said, first, Phyllis, thank you again. You have always been my wing woman of sorts, especially when dealing, as you know, with very serious medical topics, but me, without the credibility of being a medical professional myself, I know you are able to help me double and triple check the facts and issues that we will be discussing. And then Dr. Marschall Runge, we've only spoken for the last 4 months, but I'm glad we finally have a chance to have you here on Frank About Health. Even our initial discussions have been amazing in terms of the pending book, which is now to become a reality. And I can say that I've had a lot of personal experience with many of the issues you discuss on the book. So welcome to Frank About Health. I do want to introduce your background, but why don't you unmute yourself? Why don't you give your own thoughts first, and then I'll really give your bio the full expression it deserves.
Well, thank you, Frank, and thank you, Phyllis. It's a privilege to be on with you today, and I look forward to our discussion very much. This book that has been completed will come out next week, The Great Healthcare Disruption, is something that I had the opportunity to write with Forbes, and really was a unique opportunity to discuss in the book topics that I think are going to be very important in healthcare over the coming 5 to 10 years. And I've spent virtually my entire, well, not quite my entire adult life, but the last 40 years in healthcare, and think that there's no better time than today to be thinking about how can we improve the health of Americans. And I am involved in medical student training, resident training, and running a large health system. So it's I really look forward to our conversation because you both will bring great wisdom to the topic.
Excellent, excellent. Well, I was also going to say that, it has been probably 135 episodes now that I've done this podcast. And for the first 3.5 years of it, it has been like an individual growing into the role of advocate, especially when doing actual caregiving for members of my family, as well as having guests come on the show and really talk about their own personal stories and whatever. But I've always been seeking a medical professional such as yourself to be on the show. And I'm very excited. You're actually helping me pivot the show into be the advocacy platform it's headed towards in 2025, especially with all the chaos that we are experiencing. And Phyllis knows firsthand how I had to take a hiatus just to retool everything for the unknown changes we were going to be seeing at the turn of the year. So, that being said, I have this thought of healthcare disruption, like in the title of your book, but I think it's kind of obvious that I'm starting with the disruption that we see in our society at large. Without getting into names or specifics, can you give an overview as to where that chaos is coming from? Is it coming from any planned place or just basic ignorance? What would you say?
I think that the it's at several levels. First level is I'll bet the three of us could agree that healthcare in the United States is not perfect. Agree with that?
Yes.
And this so the concept that we can do better in healthcare and particularly in helping all of us, meaning all Americans, be healthier is not a new idea. Uh, there certainly are strong feelings about how to best accomplish that. And I think those are throughout the spectrum of being very dogmatic about what needs to be done versus more inclusive and thinking about what needs to be done. And I think that I hope that conversations like this will lead us to being advocates for how can we best improve healthcare, make it highest quality. We all focus on the patient and what can
Yeah.
we do for the patient. I think as long as we keep our focus on the patient, we'll do right with our patients and with healthcare.
Yes. Yes, I agree. I mean, for me, disruption is a case where you go to the doctor and it's not one solution fits all. You have a doctor or a nurse or an emergency room attendant or an EMS person all looking at your case and having a different interpretation based on their skill level. And it can be confusing if you're the patient and not really know what's happening. But if you're someone who already has a sense of what to look for and what to ask and how to describe your condition, you have a way of managing and creating a team building exercise. But I think that's why it's not perfect. Not everyone has that expertise. And I guess if you have already been living your life with a chronic illness, you kind of inherit the expertise through experience. But if you're not in that position and you're just finding yourself, as they would say, flying blind and trying to deal with all the interpretations, I can only imagine the anxiety that any patient would have without having the right advocate behind them. And I gather, is that safe to say that's what your book is going to be helping patients and other professionals learn how to muddle through the chaos that's going on?
I hope it'll be an opportunity for people to think, at least reflect on what I think are the biggest disruptions. Some are positive, some are not so positive, that we'll be
Right.
seeing and how they incorporate that into their view of health and view of their own health.
Yes. No, I agree. So, Phyllis, what do you think? I mean, obviously, it is a matter of fact, not fiction. What would you say are your views? Similar.
Well, as we spoke about a couple of weeks back, I am concerned, about the recent executive orders that are coming out of Washington and how disruptive they are potentially going to be. Because here's the thing, I'm not sure what's fact and what's fiction.
Right.
And we spoke at length a couple of weeks ago about making sure wherever you got your information, it was factual and reliable, and that's very difficult to ascertain.
Right.
I am concerned that there are going to be cuts to Medicare. Again, I don't think people realize that 2/3 of the people who are in nursing homes and need skilled nursing care of some sort, some nature, are dependent upon Medicare. I don't think people really understand that the remaining portion of the people on Medicare are children and perhaps their mothers and people with developmental issues and people who have cognitive disabilities.
Right.
So, I think there's a misrepresentation that there are healthy people gaming the system. Therefore, we should discontinue Medicare in and of itself. And that that could just be catastrophic for so many.
Exactly.
Yeah, just catastrophic. So we see disruptions coming out of Washington, but I think what Marshall has really written about is really trying to bring to light and bubble up, and stimulate conversation around much needed issues that talk about cost versus return on investment, access. What does the future hold as far as AI is concerned? How can we benefit from that? What are some of the things that are holding us back from having the best healthcare, on the planet? And
Yes.
and I think the book is rich with food for thought and discussion. And I do think that it can start a very healthy conversation that hopefully will raise awareness and lead to some steps that can be very concrete in nature that can, again, maybe move us towards better investments with return on investment, better access for all, and
Right.
and the positivity that AI brings to healthcare.
Yes.
And I know a lot of people are very concerned about AI, but if you use a GPS in your car to get from here to there, you're already using AI.
Correct.
People don't realize how much AI is already in our day-to-day life, and we were like not necessarily clicking with that idea. We're just taking those things for granted. So I'm
Yes.
I'm I'm hoping that the book serves that purpose. It's certainly well written, and it does discuss those things that need to be discussed.
Yes.
So I'm looking forward to what comes after the book coming out next week.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, it's funny. We just hit the point of the 2-minute mark. That being said, ladies and gentlemen, this particular episode of Frank About Health is going to give a preview of the great healthcare disruption to be released on the 6th of May. In the next section, we're going to dedicate to one of the chapters which both Dr. Runge as well as Phyllis will discuss in detail, as will segment 3 focus on another poignant chapter. And when we wrap up the show, we will go into the future of healthcare when we talk about not just the next show that we're doing on the 8th, but we will touch upon AI, as well as also hear more about what Dr. Runge is planning on doing in the near future. And when we start the second segment, I will deliver as promised his complete background so all of you know that we're dealing with a leader, an innovator, and a real major advocate that everyone must know, especially when that book comes out. So stay tuned right here on talkradio.nyc and on our YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitch channels, and we will continue in a few. See you soon.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour Awakening Humanity, Thursdays 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a high-achieving, growth-oriented leader? Are you interested in developing your authentic leadership while creating a healthy, inclusive workplace? Hi, I'm Dr. Mira Brancu, host of The Hard Skills on talkradio.nyc at 5 p.m. Eastern on Tuesdays, where we discuss how leaders develop the hard skills needed to make a greater impact. We interview experts, have live coaching, and tackle these challenges. Listen to The Hard Skills on Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back. So, Marschall S. Runge, MD, Ph.D., is the Executive Vice President for Medical Affairs at the University of Michigan, Dean of the Medical School, and CEO of Michigan Medicine. He earned his doctorate in molecular biology at Vanderbilt University and his medical degree from Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, where he has also completed a residency in internal medicine. He was a cardiology fellow at the Massachusetts General Hospital. Dr. Runge is the author of over 250 publications, holds 5 patents for novel approaches to healthcare. He's a Texas native who spent 15 years in North Carolina and an avid thriller reader. Runge has experienced so many you can't make this up events that inform his writing. Now, that being said, aside from the nonfiction, you're going to be writing a real fictional book, or rather you've already written it and it's going to be published next Tuesday, or it's going to be released next Tuesday. I think that is what we want to talk about now, along with Phyllis, especially when dealing not just in discussing disruption, but discussing about the different lacks about doctors and nurses that are being aged out of the system, to talk about other kind of healthcare cuts that are going on, as well as I'm sure we've already received some questions that you want to elaborate on. So I think I'm not going to go into any more details. Phyllis, you take it away, and I'm ready to learn and take notes myself.
You bet. Well, Marshall, you characterize the United States healthcare system as the most expensive in the world, but it doesn't necessarily have the clinical outcomes to justify that expenditure. I'm not quite sure what you are inferring, but who needs to take responsibility for that? And could you elaborate on that thought?
Excuse me. Yes. Thanks, Phyllis. And before I start, I want to completely endorse what you said earlier. A 70,000-foot view with cuts to Medicare or Medicaid or other programs could be, and I'll use your word, catastrophic. And I think we are at risk of that always when people develop policy who aren't engaged. You yourself, and me, myself, we know healthcare from a hands-on standpoint, and that's a very different level than many policymakers know about. So when you just look at the cost of healthcare, the United States, healthcare in the United States per capita is more expensive than anywhere else in the world. And you might say, well, why is that? And I think there are a lot of different reasons. One that I talk about in the first chapter of the book is the dearth in primary care. So it'll be no surprise to any of you that it's hard to find primary care providers, whether they're physician, advanced practice providers at any level. We all need that. And that is such an important component of our being able to be healthy and be proactive, such that we don't end up entering a system like ours, which does fantastic things, but we enter it, I think, at a point that could be delayed considerably if we were more focused on our own health. And so a reflection of that is, I talked about how healthcare in the United States costs are very high. If you look at the number of primary care providers per capita, our number is low, very, very low compared to other like countries in the world. And so that is part of this critical equation. One other comment I'll make is that most other countries of like wealth have figured out a way to provide basic healthcare such that people don't go without healthcare and then have to enter a system when, in a fragmented way, go into emergency rooms for care or urgent care centers for care. And I think that too is a challenge that we need to take on, and I think we need to take that on as a society.
I absolutely agree. The whole idea of primary care, I'm behind you 100%. And I do think that some of the advanced care practitioners, nurse practitioners, physician assistant programs are doing a great job in turning out graduates that are really starting to fill that gap. We certainly saw that during COVID. We didn't have enough physicians and surgeons, to pull out of the OR to serve everyone. If it wasn't for the advanced care practitioners, I think we certainly would have struggled to meet the success that we did on the level that we did. I have my own opinion about why we don't have enough primary care physicians. Could you share with us why you think that is?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I'll speak to our own medical students. So every year we enter a new class of about 170 medical students. About a quarter of them are very passionate about primary care, and that's what they see as a future for themselves. By the time they graduate, we're down to a much lower percentage of the class. And I think the components of that are, first of all, they don't have the kind of experiences in a big academic medical center in primary care that they would if they went to clinics and worked with various primary care providers. And when our students do that, when they do that, they get very engaged, and they learn firsthand what it's like to be a primary care provider. In their case, they'll be a physician, but they work shoulder to shoulder, side to side with nurse practitioners and physician assistants, and they see how a medical team can come together. So I think we need to work on how we provide that education. The second, though, is that, as we all know, reimbursement for primary care, I think, is inappropriately low. And that's true for everyone who provides primary care. And it's so important, it's not properly recognized. So when somebody has gone through medical school and they've accumulated a significant amount of debt, they start worrying, will they be able to pay that debt back? And I think it's practical considerations like that. And there are some unique models out there that I think could be helpful, unique for physicians, primary care training tracks, both in medical school and in residency, many of which could accommodate loan repayment after they start their career. So I think there's some levers we could pull, but we're not pulling them right now.
Yeah, I think the reimbursement, quite honestly, is a serious one.
Right.
And I think the term is RVUs.
Yes.
When you do your billing, all those units that you can document, that would be the basis of your reimbursement. And if you're not in a specialty, then you're not doing the high reimbursable procedures that could, of course, give you the most return. But I agree with you. I have family who spent, upwards of $350,000 on their medical surgical education. He's a surgeon, and it's going to take a long time to come out from under that. So, fortunately for him, he's, an in-demand surgeon. But, if we're looking at primary care, we certainly have to do a little bit more about equity with the reimbursement, for sure. You bring up an interesting concept in chapter 1, Marshall. You say that, you're looking to challenge the traditional expectation that Americans hold about healthcare. And I just want to quote you here, such as the belief that everyone should get every treatment they need when they need it, no matter what the cost. Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yes. So our system is not capable of delivering that. And you already pointed out the importance of non-physician primary care providers and being able to provide access. But if you go to almost any medical center today, the wait time to see a primary care provider is too long, so we fail there. And when people reach a point of unhealthiness and require very high-tech procedures, those are very expensive. And when you think about it, we can't provide that level of care at that cost for everybody, because everybody doesn't need it. If they were able to improve their health along the way, they wouldn't need that care. So that basic premise is flawed in the way that our health system works today. I want to give you one little practical example about the payment of primary care providers versus high-tech specialists. So the RVU stands for relative value unit, and for a primary care provider, it's hard to generate more than 2 RVUs per hour. Maybe you can generate 3 or 4. For a highly technical, and they get paid about reimbursed at about $70 or $80 per RVU in a good system. If you then look at somebody who does very complicated surgery, they might, although the surgery takes a while, they might be able to generate 1,000 RVUs in the course of a 2-hour surgery. That's just the way it's been weighted by Medicare, starting back in the 1970s. So these are old criteria. When many of the procedures we did today weren't even in existence. And they get paid more per RVU, but if you think about it, that disconnect between a primary care provider being able to generate maybe $100 an hour and have to pay for overhead and malpractice insurance and everything else you have to pay for. Another physician being able to have maybe higher expenses but generate 100 times or even 1,000 times that many RVUs. It's no wonder there's that huge discrepancy. And I think we've let that go along unrecognized. Well, recognized but unaddressed for far
Recognized
too
but
long.
unaddressed, yes.
Right.
And the disproportion about the RVUs with pediatrics, we had discussed that a couple
Yes.
of days ago. And the disproportionate RVUs for reimbursement for physicians and healthcare providers for women's issues. So if you have a woman who is going to specialize in OBGYN, geographically, you're looking at the same organ system as opposed to a urologist who's treating predominantly men. And the RVUs are much higher for the treatment of men's reproductive or renal issues than they are for women's reproductive and renal issues. So again, it's not just the incentive, and there's just so much, well, isn't it a calling? Aren't you serving and doing what you want? At some point in time, you have to pay off those medical bills. You have to put food on the table. You have to provide for your family. So, I really hope that your book starts to stimulate not just conversation, but action in the direction of, equity across the board as far as reimbursement is concerned, and start to take some of the absolute, I can't even characterize it as unconscious bias, some of the bias, approaches towards reimbursement. Yeah.
Totally agree. And I'll just say that many health policy experts are thinking about and actively talking about whether the RVU system needs to be scrapped. And we need to think about reimbursement in a different way.
Right. So when you say that the American public has to rethink their approach to healthcare, can you just elaborate a little bit on that? That everything has to be treated all at once in every way. I know definitely the primary care piece is there. But, in one of my many lives, I'm a legal nurse consultant, and I have been doing expert witnessing and legal nurse consulting for the better part of 20 years. Do you think that litigation has a lot to factor into people insisting on specialty physicians as opposed to general practitioners? And do you think and the threat of litigation influencing cost in healthcare?
The answer is, I don't know how many questions you had, but it's yes to all of them. So there is no question that the threat of litigation is a concern for particularly people who are trying to cover a broad range, like a primary care provider. So they're expected to be expert in all of these areas, as expert as a specialist might be in this much of it. So that too is an issue that I think we have to reconcile. I will say one thing about primary care providers is maybe the best protection against litigation is having a great relationship with your patients, and they do. And it's not just technical issues that impact high-tech specialties. It's also they don't really have a ongoing relationship with many of the patients that they see and treat.
I couldn't agree more. So I just want to, finish up this segment by asking you, just one more question about chapter one. And you talk about innovation being hollow if it's not matched with access. Could you talk about that a little bit more?
Yes, I do think innovation, and you talked briefly about AI,
Hmm.
and I agree with you about AI. I think it has tremendous potential, and it has the potential to be able to fill these gaps. So I'm not talking about you call up to get an appointment and you see a bot. I'm talking about how these AI bots can do a lot of things that now providers have to do related to documentation, related to billing and collection, related to scheduling. Doesn't require certainly doesn't require a healthcare provider. Doesn't even require a person in a lot of situations. So I think part of our being able to work our way out of this mire we're in is through technology, and that's what I was trying to get to.
Right.
I also think that, and I didn't mention this specifically in chapter one, and I wish I had. I think we can do so much more on health education in primary and secondary schools. Young people are they're a um, their brains soak in information, and if we can provide people like yourself, Phyllis, or me sometimes, but also people they hold in high regard to help provide health information and how they can be more healthy, we can start to turn around the generation we've generated over the last 20 years where health is getting worse in the United States and maybe help turn it around, which, um, again, I think the primary care providers play a critical role, but I think also education does.
Yes,
We-
I couldn't agree.
We're running a little overtime. I didn't see the 1 minute mark, but I'm going to go and we're going to go into segment three, follow up on what you were starting to talk about in terms of secondary education, because that is definitely an issue, especially in terms of having the right transgenerational primary care physicians in the future. But more importantly, when we return, we'll also talk about chapter 10. So everybody that was just listening to this discussion that Phyllis and Dr. and Marshall were
Thank you.
having, you're very welcome. It was all about reimagining healthcare. That's the title of that chapter. All right, everybody, stay tuned. We'll be back in a few.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host a program, Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on talkradio.nyc.
Hi, I'm Linda Marcanico. The A Train to Sedona is a memoir about my journey to love and compassion. It's also the name of my new broadcast on Wednesdays at 12 noon. When we are spiritual, we embrace possibilities and ideas, which strengthen our mind, body, spirit, health, and wisdom. On the A Train to Sedona broadcast, I plan to interview guests who embrace these expansive practices. Join us on Wednesdays at 12 noon on Talk Radio New York City.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back. As you've just heard, both Phyllis and Marshall were discussing about how we are to reimagine healthcare given our recent limitations, our challenges, the chaotic shifts that seem to be going on, and not to mention new technologies like AI. Now we're going to cover Chapter 10, A Prescription for Change. That's the title of that chapter. That would be in relation to what was initially discussed. There was a little bit of a discussion starting on how we advance within primary and secondary schools the medical education and really get people when they're younger and more adaptable with new end technologies to get involved in the healthcare space and help serve our increasing needs, especially as the older population will all be, well, majority of the older population will be above 65 when they graduate. So that being said, Phyllis, take it away so we can understand what that chapter is going to show for a good prescription for change. unmute first.
I think I want to try to bridge a gap between chapter 1 and chapter 10, because
Sure.
what Marshall was alluding to is that people have to change their idea and perspective on healthcare, whether it's healthcare on demand, or are we more proactive and take more responsibility in preventative care. And, there's also the idea that people have to be more responsible and engaged in their care. And to tie in that AI piece, all I can think about really is the advances that we've made in monitoring blood glucose for diabetes, and how significant an impact that has on the lives of people who are living with diabetes. So, is there something that you can speak about, Marshall, that here AI in this particular case, where you can implant something on your skin that's going to take your blood glucose readings, and you're going to either loop that or hook that with a link to your phone, so that you can now, with your insulin pump, treat yourself so that you stay between the magic numbers of 70 and 120, glucose levels, where we know that that's normal and you're not going to get the consequences of hypo or hyperglycemia down the road. Can you speak a little bit about how we can make advances in that regard, knowing full well, again, to loop in the children? Unfortunately, type 1 diabetes, which is insulin-dependent diabetes, usually starts at a young age.
Phyllis, first of all, thank you for the diabetes example. That's a great example of technology being able to impact health. And what you know, and I know, and Frank knows, but not everybody knows, is the problem with diabetes is, yes, it's important to keep your blood glucose under control, but why? And the reason is because of all the illnesses that occur in poorly controlled diabetes, like kidney failure or heart failure, or blindness. Yes, absolutely. So I think it's a perfect example of how, if we can have technology that helps us to avoid these complications, that's where the big savings is, and that's where health is. And so I think, in my stage in life, I'm not nearly as facile with devices and wearables as younger people are, but I think we will see a flood of wearable monitors, and some of those will be predictive, like you see the commercials on late night TV about somebody who has the button they can push if they've fallen down and can't get up. I mean, that's one level, but these wearables will be able to detect increases in heart rate or any changes in blood pressure, changes in movement, that can be very predictive of both physical and mental health issues, and will get people to care much sooner than they would otherwise. It may not be quite as instantaneous as being able to control your insulin pump, but things like that. I'll also, I want to pivot just slightly. There's a center in Seattle that does a lot of predictive work on quality of life healthcare. And it's predicted, although the United States, we're like 60th in the world right now, but they did publish a recent study this year suggesting that if we don't change anything, we'll be twice that low by 2050. And there are two big factors that they found in their study that are predictive. And one is obesity, and a second is opiate use. And we hear about all of those all the time. And if we could help control those with feedback loops or other approaches, sometimes pharmacological, that can have such a positive impact on life. So I do think that it's these advances in technology that can help us as individuals and also as a community reduce complications that we know how to reduce. We just aren't able to do that right now.
Yeah, and take ownership in doing that. In other words, partner with your physician.
Yes, absolutely.
One of the other things you allude to or speak about in chapter 10 is perhaps it's time for policy changes, significant policy changes that might bring in the federal government even a little bit more. And I know that especially in this day and age, it might be a little controversial. I was wondering if you were alluding to the Yale study from 2020 that showed that there would be a significant healthcare savings and healthcare improvement if we had a Medicare for all. That it would lower cost, it would make pharmaceutical products much more reasonable because we could negotiate differently. It would make access different. And are those some of the policy changes you're speaking about in Chapter 10? And if not, what were you trying to address?
Well, those are the kind of policy changes I'm thinking about. They have gotten so politicized over many years. So universal health was an approach discussed back in the early 1990s. It got just, tarred and feathered and sent out of town. The next version was Medicare for all, which is basically the same concept. What I'm going to suggest, what I try to suggest is I didn't call it this in the book, but it's basically longitudinal healthcare, that everybody has some level of healthcare. And that's perfectly possible. And it doesn't mean that we're going to have governmentized healthcare for everybody. It means that there's a basal level and people get primary care and they get the medications they need at prices that are reasonable. And when you look around, a lot of our peers, almost all of them, have some level of this. And I'm going to take one that always surprises people, which is Denmark. Denmark gets great kudos for its federal sponsored healthcare. But it, like so many other countries, what's not talked about is that a large portion of the population also buys supplemental insurance on top of that. And that's the case almost everywhere. It varies how much in UK and Canada, Sweden, Denmark, other countries. But so it's not saying that the government needs to take over all of healthcare. It's saying that what the government does is provide, it's able to look at the long run. So the government doesn't see an ROI on building highways. It doesn't see an ROI in a year or two. It doesn't see an ROI in providing clean water. But those are big investments that are made that pay off in the future. And that's really different than the way commercial insurance has to look at things. They have shareholders who want to see profits and return in 6 months or in a year. So I think the government can play quite a unique role. And one thing you mentioned, Phyllis, that I think is so important, the government has enormous purchasing power. And for the costs of pharmaceuticals and other medical needs, devices, et cetera, could provide those at a much lower cost than is possible by any other provider.
Yes. Well, I know we're coming up to going into our next break, but I don't think we do anybody any justice if we don't hear Marshall's views on how Big Pharma and the insurance companies are playing into the high cost of healthcare and maybe influencing the poor return on that investment. Perhaps we can talk about that in the next segment for a little bit, Frank.
Absolutely. And I think the one takeaway as an observer, like I've just been watching the two of you really exchange in this dialogue, is that as I've been always saying on the show, everyone has to learn to shift their behavior to not look like the passive participant in their healthcare with their doctor or whoever's taking care of them, their specialist, their therapist, whomever it is. They have to, I guess, like you say in the book, create a behavioral shift in their own sense of how they are participating in themselves as part of the bigger picture. And I think that's a mindset shift as well that probably needs to be educated if it hasn't already been so. Would that be safe to say?
I would say that the American consumer has very high demands and expectations.
Yes, and they have to be
Exactly.
They have to be more subdued, especially when it comes to their healthcare. So, ladies and gentlemen, proportionately, yes, exactly. That all being said, just stay tuned. We'll be back in a few.
Were you an essential worker during the pandemic? If you needed to learn stages of epilepsy, did you depend on advocates? Did you use new innovations to cope with mental and neurological issues? Maintaining high quality of life and keeping good mental health are what we all strive for. I'm Frank R. Harrison, host of Frank About Health, And each week, top healthcare influencers, professionals, and innovators answer these questions and more. Stay tuned on Thursdays at 5 p.m. on talkradio.nyc, and I will continue to be frank about health with all of you.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back as we conclude this very special episode of Frank About Health. As you've just seen during the commercial break, it is available for pre-order right now on Amazon.com. It is coming out on the 6th, but if you pre-order right now, you will get it in your mailbox by the 6th. And that all being said, I know, Phyllis, you brought up a good point that if, Marshall, you could go into exactly just... Go ahead. You said it best, Phyllis.
I was just interested in your thoughts about the influence of, healthcare as a business. And I'm often talking to clinicians who are having some sort of moral dilemma and questioning around those of us who are professional care providers and then the business people who are running the business of healthcare. And I often say to people, please don't try to align them or make them dovetail into one another. They will never align. It's coming from two different perspectives and two different purposes and missions. I just would love to hear your thoughts about, the whole idea of what's going on with the insurance companies and, of course, Big Pharma. Yes, we need research and development, but does insulin have to bankrupt you?
So, Phyllis, first of all, I really like the way you drew the distinction between clinicians and people in business, because I do think at the heart of almost all clinicians, they're in healthcare because they want to improve health for the people they touch. But we have to recognize healthcare is an enormous business. It's now comprising, depending on where you look, 18% of the gross national product of the United States of America. That's a gigantic amount of money. And so there are strong forces for investment. For example, in the last several years, medical groups, including all kinds of providers, are being purchased by venture capitalists to try to run that more efficiently and turn a profit on it. I mean, that was a real epiphany to me, seeing how much investment there is in healthcare. So you specifically talked about insurance and Big Pharma, and I want to address those. So they are two areas in which there is a very important profit model. They're publicly owned companies generally, or privately owned companies that report to shareholders. They each do important functions. I think that as I discussed in the last section, I think there are alternatives for basic healthcare that could probably be done better and much less expensively not being part of that profit model. Now, what about Big Pharma? So Big Pharma has developed some incredible drugs, and I think that's very important. And I think we don't want to see that innovation go away, but they are extremely expensive. So take, for example, what are now called weight loss drugs, but initially were diabetes drugs that cost much less than they do as weight loss drugs. Their technical title is GLP-1 agonists. And in general, they cost consumers or somebody, whoever's paying, about $1,000 a month. I mean, if you have to pay that yourself, you could never afford it. And that's why insurance companies and others are pushing back on that price. One thing that will certainly happen is there are more and more entrants of these drugs, the prices will come down. But I think also looking at how we can help pharmaceutical companies meet their goals, which are to be profitable and be able to invest, and meet our goals of being able to provide those medications at a reasonable cost, has to be related to purchasing power. And again, I'll go back to how federal government has enormous purchasing power, and that's an easy win for everybody. Costs less and makes important drugs available widely. And I'll give you two examples. One is the GLP example, which I just gave. And I know from talking to colleagues, they could probably get down to $300, $200 a month, which puts them in line with many other brand name pharmaceuticals. But it's a volume issue. And not everybody needs those drugs. I mean, I think we need to accept that not everybody needs to be on those drugs, but there are some people that do need to be on them. Let me take something at the far other end of the spectrum. You were talking about children previously, and there are children who have inherited genetic diseases. And we now have genetic therapies, they have been developed that can cure these diseases. The diseases, fortunately, are fairly rare. They're sometimes called orphan diseases, but they can cure it. And so children that would be sick for their entire life and die at a very young age, that disease can be cured. But it's enormously expensive. It could cost $1 million for that therapy. So you have to take a step back and say, well, what is it worth for that child not to have to go through 10 years of misery and high cost medicine? Is it worth $1 million? Probably it's not worth $1 million, but it's worth a lot of dollars. And so how do we more rationally think about the costs? There's a person at University of Michigan in our health policy innovation group named Mark Fendrick, and he touts a program called VBID, Value-Based Insurance Design. And it talks about these issues of trying to figure out really what is the value in certain medications, what's the value in certain therapies, and what is the right value to be delivered. And he does get involved at a federal level and talks to administrations on both sides of the political spectrum. I think we need more of that to really look at what is the value proposition and how do we develop that. And I think we have to be upfront about saying, should healthcare be driven as much as it is by the profit motive? Personally, I think there are many layers that have gotten engaged in healthcare. Even in pharmaceuticals, there's several layers that make the cost of drugs much higher than it needs to be. That isn't initiated entirely by the drug companies. So that's a meaty question, and one that I think, again, the more that people understand this, the better they can advocate for fair pricing, for equity, and being able to achieve and obtain these goals necessary for their own health.
Now, does that kind of bring you into chapter 8, where you talk about what happens if there's another pandemic? I mean, in order to prepare for that, it looks like we have to be already educated in how to use our newly adapted resources of knowing from experience what it is that we can do to expedite the solutions much quicker, right?
Yeah, the COVID pandemic was a great example of something totally nobody had predicted that. Yet I think we responded fairly well. We didn't respond as well as some other countries in terms of trying to practice better prevention of cross-infection, but I think we did fairly well, and certainly the rapid development of testing and vaccines was something that was a bipartisan effort. So we can do that, but we have to be prepared for, and we have no idea what the next crisis is going to be. So we have to be prepared.
Now, would you say that mRNA was a form of AI vaccine, because it wasn't the actual disease? It was just the coding, the genetic coding that enabled a lot of people to become immune, or at least minimize the risk of getting infected with COVID.
Yeah, I would say it's not an AI derived approach, but it's comparable. It's as transformational. vaccines usually took 10 years to develop. With mRNA vaccines, it took less than a year to develop vaccines that have been highly effective. It's like AI. AI can do in 6 months what it took the development of the internet 20 years to do.
Exactly.
And so let's leverage all these things.
And I'm glad you used the word leverage because, as you could probably see, we're 2 minutes till the end of our show. And I just wanted to say that everyone, you're not done with Dr. Marschall Runge just yet. On next week's episode of Frank About Health, which will be live, Marschall Runge will be back again with me and with another special guest from my alma mater, Brooklyn Technical High School, who is a genetic engineer out in LA. His name is David Yang, and he already has seen your book. I gave him the copy that you forwarded to me, and he is going to ask you all those pivotal questions, including the ones that have been building in my mind that I want to go back to when we meet next week. And it will be live, so all of you out there who have questions as well for this show, please go ahead and write them all in your YouTube chat box or in the LinkedIn comment section. And I or Marshall or even Phyllis will go ahead and get back to you. Or you can reach me at frankrharrison1@gmail.com. And in addition, remember to buy the book, The Great Healthcare Disruption. It is going to be also a useful self-guide, especially when you're aware of not only how our society, as well as the advanced technologies that will be heavily discussed on next week's episode, AI in particular, will be able to show how you can own your healthcare even in the midst of all this chaos, and we can do what we can to mitigate what's going on in the great healthcare disruption. Thank you, Phyllis, again for being here. And Marshall, it was definitely a pleasure talking with you all these months prior to this particular episode, and I'm heavily looking forward to seeing the success of this book next week, especially on Frank About Health. Everyone, stay tuned for our new series that is debuting right now on talkradio.nyc. And I will see you all next week. Alrighty.
And Frank,
Yes.
I just want to say thank you to you and Phyllis for what you're doing, because I think it is so important that you're bringing the message about health out broadly. It's a privilege to be on the show with you, but I really appreciate what you're doing, and anything that I can do to get more people to listen to you, I would love to do.
Thank you, Marshall.
Exactly. That is also music to my ears, because if anything, Phyllis can tell you firsthand that while I have been successful at bringing Frank About Health to the social media audience out there and to fellow patients and advocates and things like that, I have always wanted to engage with the medical system. I am a firm believer in NYU Langone Health. I know you are of Michigan Medicine, and I know with Phyllis, you have a lot of good relationships in the New York City area, that we all want people to learn from this show, almost like a webinar type of thing. So you contributing to this particular episode is helping shape that narrative for the future of this podcast. And I thank you for that. Alrighty. All right, everybody, we're signing off. See you next week. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.